So hello and welcome to the live Q&A. This is Ask a Simons Searchlight Genetic Counselor. It's part of the Simons Searchlight Rare Disease webinar series. My name is Elisheva Dubin. I am a Simons Searchlight Genetic Counselor, and I graduated from Sarah Lawrence College with a master's in human genetics and genetic counseling, and I'm going to be moderating the session today. So I can't see you or hear you, but we are hoping that this session can be interactive. So if you have any questions, we welcome you to ask any questions in the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we just encourage you to avoid using personal health information for your own privacy. So for those of you who don't know, Simons Searchlight is an online international research program, and we are building an ever-growing natural history database, biorepository, and resource network of over 175 rare genetic neurodevelopmental disorders. By joining our community and sharing your experiences, you contribute to a growing database used by scientists all over the world to advance the understanding of these conditions. And of course, you can always learn more by visiting our website at simonssearchlight.org. So Simons Searchlight currently has 4 genetic counselors who work on our research registry. We review your lab reports, your medical history information that's submitted on the surveys. We answer medical questions from participants. We compile medical information that lives on our website and so much more. And today you will be hearing from 2 of our Simons Searchlight genetic counselors, Jamie Lundy and Misia Kowanda. So Jamie received her Master's of Science in Genetic Counseling from the University of Pennsylvania, and Misia received her Master's of Science in Genetic Counseling from Sarah Lawrence College. And both Jamie and Misia are certified by the American Board of Genetic Counseling. So Jamie, I'll let you introduce the part of the project that you work on, and then we'll move on.
Of course. So I spend most of my time reviewing genetic testing reports. Our team reviews every lab report to ensure that each family is eligible to participate with us. And during our review, we gather the most up-to-date information for our researchers to use. On average, we're typically reviewing about 20 new lab reports per week, so we are pretty busy. But during our review, we decide critical elements, such as if we can offer confirmation testing, for example, if that genetic variant was first found on a research result, or if we can offer testing for other family members that may be beneficial for them. We also spend a good amount of time answering questions that come through our Facebook groups, email, and phone. And of course, we have other fun tasks like this webinar too.
All right, so for today's goals, we will answer the broad questions that have been submitted by participants, and questions range covering genetic terms, what genetic testing results might mean, what resources are available within Simons Searchlight, and so much more. So let's dive into our questions, and just note that we might not be able to get to everything, but we will, of course, do our best. And to make this webinar as helpful to as many people as possible, we'll avoid answering more specific questions about specific genetic conditions, and questions specific to procedures, treatments, or other topics outside of our expertise will not be covered today. We're also recording this session, so it will be available to view later on YouTube. So let's start with some general genetic questions, and we'll have Misia kickstart with some answers. So Misia, what is the difference between a genetic variant, a gene change, and a mutation?
Yes, so this is a really great question, and it's also, I think, a common one that we get when we talk one-on-one with the families. So between a genetic variant, a gene change, and a mutation, they're all the same thing. It's all describing the same sort of thing, which is a change in your DNA. And so what you might have heard in the clinic is the term mutation. I think still clinicians, when they're returning results, will use this term. But mutation, by definition, it means a change in the DNA that is positive, negative, or has no difference. And so because mutation has a negative connotation, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and such, the negative connotation with the term mutation has meant that the genetics community has changed the way we talk about this. So in general, we should be using the term, and Simons Searchlight uses the term genetic variant. But all these terms are totally interchangeable and not incorrect when used in the clinic.
Great. Is a genetic condition found in my family a disease? I have been having a difficult time with the term Rare Disease Month. Jamie.
So this is a question that has come up a couple of times with different families that we work with in Simons Searchlight, and certainly acknowledging that February is Rare Disease Month. This is something that a lot of us are thinking about. So in the United States, the FDA defines the term rare disease by using a couple of parameters in mind. So they think about criteria like prevalence of the disease, also severity of the disease, and the FDA defines a rare disease as a condition that affects fewer than 200,000 people. Now, terminology can mean different things to different people. Sometimes disease, people might think about an infectious disease, so something that somebody catches, because of a bacteria or virus or something like that. And of course, genetic conditions are not infectious in that same way. So I think that is some of the difficulties that people can, think about with translating a genetic condition to a disease, quote unquote. But because so many of the genetic conditions that we study in Simons Searchlight do fit the criteria as far as the prevalence being less than 200,000 people, we do consider the genetic conditions studied in Simons Searchlight to be rare diseases.
Next question. Misia, what is genetic testing?
Yeah, I assume many families or people on the call may have had some genetic testing, which is why you might be here today. Genetic testing means a whole umbrella of any sort of testing that was done looking at your genes and genetic material. Not all genetic tests are equal. So what they look for is very specific or very broad. It depends on the test. And so just because you've had one type of genetic test doesn't mean that you're covered for all sorts of genetic conditions that can be found. There are limitations and to every single type of test. I don't know, Jamie, if you would add anything else.
Yeah, I think that I would just echo that with all of the different types of genetic testing options that are available, this is why being seen by a clinical genetics team to really be able to look at an individual's personal history, also their family history, to be able to coordinate appropriate genetic testing is so critical. We lean on doctors for their areas of expertise, so a neurologist for, expertise involving the brain, etc. So just trying to amplify the importance of being plugged in with the clinical genetics team to coordinate whatever type of appropriate genetic testing may be warranted.
Amy, can you explain what pathogenic means and what is a VUS?
Yes, so I will build off of Misia's first answer a little bit. She helped to outline how we think about terminology, mutation versus genetic variant versus gene change. And genetic variant, as Misia was saying, is typically what Simons Searchlight is going with. Part of that being that a genetic variant just describes typically a certain spelling change within a gene, and not all spelling changes are harmful or are going to affect that person's health and development in any way. So the terms as far as VUS being the abbreviation for a variant of uncertain significance, or pathogenic, meaning disease causing or harmful to that gene and how it's functioning, is just how we classify the significance of a genetic variant. So the clearer cut ones are pathogenic, being a genetic variant that we have sufficient evidence to say that we believe that this spelling change would affect the way that this gene works in some way. There's also benign or harmless genetic variants. These typically aren't reported back on genetic testing because we all have thousands of these, thousands of normal genetic variation that doesn't affect our health and learning. And the sort of gray zone result is where we would put these variants of uncertain significance. They can often be the most frustrating type of results to receive, and that's because laboratories and clinicians often don't know how to reconcile them. So they don't have enough information to say that we believe that this is harmless, but then also not enough information to say that we believe that this is harmful. With those variants of uncertain significance, our genetics knowledge and our ability to interpret them changes over time. So the hope is always that we're able to resolve those VUSs with either being able to put them as benign or pathogenic.
Following up on that, Misia, if you can answer, what information is used to classify the significance of gene variants?
Yeah, so when we geneticists, meaning geneticists, genetic counselors, your clinical team, sit down to look at a genetic variant that has been identified, and the lab also, when they do the review, they make an attempt based on the information they know as well. But there's a lot of data that comes together in order to understand if this variant makes a difference in your development. So it includes your clinical presentation, so what medical features you have and what's known about the condition to be associated. Was it inherited or was it a spontaneous, a de novo genetic variant? They use computational programs to predict. So they run this variant through a predictor, and based on certain algorithms and such, try to help guide if it may or may not be a problem. Has it been seen before in the population? And not all of the criteria is set equal. So as you can imagine, the computational program is helpful to know, but it doesn't weigh as heavily as knowing more about the genetic condition and the actual variant changing the structure in terms of a stop codon or like a problematic insertion that we are aware of. So the more that we know a particular genetic condition or that it's been studied, the faster or easier we can make these calls with confidence.
Great. Jamie, what are the costs associated with genetic testing, and does Simons Searchlight help with this?
Yeah, really great question. Genetic testing can be quite costly. It has come down over recent years with more laboratories being able to offer it and it just being more easily accessible to families, but it still can be pretty costly. If testing is coordinated clinically, then that all really depends on the individual's insurance plan, if they have any deductible, any co-insurance. So that is very, very individualized. I think that typically families can try to be as proactive as possible. So when genetic testing is recommended, really asking those clinical providers, is this something with my insurance that we would expect to be covered? Is there CPT codes for this test that I could take to my insurance to see if this is a covered benefit? Also, depending on the individual state, there are often different resources and help that can help to offset the cost of genetic testing. So again, state dependent Medicaid plans can be based on medical necessity, not necessarily household income. So there are certain qualifying clinical diagnoses that may help get a Medicaid plan to help to offset some medical costs. So I think asking social work if that's available through your individual's institution, if there's any extra resources that you may access. So that's kind of what I would say with coordinating genetic testing clinically and the cost there. With the Simons Searchlight, we are able to offer free of charge genetic testing in certain situations. And those situations are really what we're determining when we are reviewing an individual's lab report when they first register and consent with us. The cost of genetic testing, if offered through Simons Searchlight, is always covered by our grant and by the funding that we have. So never a charge if it's something that we're offering to families. And it is clinical grade testing, so it's going through a clinical laboratory that has CLIA certification to ensure that the results are accurate. But we will be sure to reach out to people if we can offer this testing for them.
Next question, Misha. My son has CHD8 and it is caused by a pathogen since neither myself or my husband have the mutation. What exactly do they mean by pathogen?
Yeah, so this is a condition within Simons Searchlight, the CHD related syndrome. And I believe caused by a pathogen, meaning that the genetic result is a pathogenic variant. So that's that classification that we were talking about, that a variant was found and the lab or the clinician determines that it's pathogenic, so it's problematic. So they are confident that it's a disease-causing genetic variant. And so if you or your husband or the father did not have this identified, that means that it's a de novo change. So it happened brand new, spontaneously in either the sperm or the egg. Genetic mistakes happen all the time, so much more common than we ever would have expected. And all of us carry genetic changes. It just really depends on if it's hitting a gene where it could be a problem or not. And so I carry them, like all of us carry them. And so when it's not found in you or your husband, then it means that, or you and the partner, the father, the other parent, then it means that it's a brand new change. And this is what I mean by an additional data point that this variant might be a problem, that it would be used as it's de novo, it could be more problematic.
And Misha, I think to add to that, it's just important for everybody to know that there's nothing that they could do or there's nothing that they could have done to stop this from happening. It's something that happens naturally and biologically, and you didn't do anything wrong. And there's nothing that you could have done to prevent it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, moving on. Jamie, what is cascade genetic testing?
So cascade genetic testing is typically targeted genetic testing for something that we identify someone to be at risk for. So for example, a situation that we see commonly with families registering with us is that their child was found to have a genetic variant in the SCN2A gene, which is one of the genes that we study in Simons Searchlight. And so that child was the first one that it was found in, and then doing cascade testing or doing targeted testing in the parents for that same SCN2A genetic variant to determine if that variant was inherited from a parent or not could be helpful in terms of providing more information to help clarify our understanding of if that variant is causing any symptoms or not. So a little bit different thinking than when that original child was doing genetic testing for genes related to seizures or even an exome or a genome, that we're casting a pretty wide net to look at a lot of different genes. Cascade testing is just targeted testing to give us a yes or no answer of does someone have or do they not have the same genetic variant as somebody else.
Misha, we found that I also carry this genetic variant. What are the chances for other people in my family to also have this genetic variant? Can I control passing it on to other future children of mine?
So, and this goes on top of sort of so within Simons Searchlight, we call our testing process cascade testing, but it's a similar process in the clinic. So if you are identified to be a carrier as a parent, and this is not uncommon, within Simons Searchlight, there's several conditions where we've been finding that the parents are carriers of the genetic variant as well. The chances sort of go back. We do go back to, that person's parents. So my parents, if I'm the carrier, we would go back to see if the parents are carrying the condition or your siblings. And so if the parents do, you do the process of elimination. If the parents are not carriers, then it might be assumed that it's de novo in you. If another sibling in your family has also the genetic variant, the exact same genetic variant, the chances that happens spontaneously twice is very low. So then we might assume that one of your parents are actually carrying it within their sperm or eggs. but the rest of their blood, where the blood sample or the cheek samples came up negative. And so it really depends on sort of this process of elimination. But for future children, it's about a 50-50 chance. And you can do prenatal testing to find out for that condition whether your next child will also have the genetic condition. But in short, the answer is 50-50.
Yeah. And Misha, I think adding to that is that there's always prenatal testing that people can do once they're in a pregnancy to check if that pregnancy is affected with whatever we're talking about. And if people are nervous or, or they feel like they don't have the emotional wherewithal to get pregnant and then potentially find out that the fetus is affected with whatever we're talking about, there is a lot of times there is an option of doing IVF with pre-implantation genetic testing, which is where they pick out the embryo that is not affected with whatever condition we're speaking of. Okay, moving on. Jamie, we got back genetic testing results, but I still have some questions. Now what?
Yeah, I think a lot of families find themselves in a very similar boat, especially once they've had time to really research a specific gene on their own, join a community. A lot of times, the more information that you learn, the more questions you come up with. So there's certainly a couple of different options as far as coordinating appropriate follow-up and getting those questions answered, hopefully. Of course, one avenue would be going back to whoever helped coordinate that initial genetic testing, just to see if there's any support that they could provide, any specific directions that they could give back. There's also research programs like all of ourselves. We are always very happy to connect with families and answer any of their questions or concerns, of course, to the best of our ability. Also here in the United States and Canada, the National Society of Genetic Counselors has a really nice Find a Genetic Counselor tool on their website that you can plug in your area and then hopefully get connected with a local genetic counselor near you. That can be helpful in terms of recommending any local-based resources that you might not be aware of.
Okay, moving on. Misha, why does the classification of genetic variants happen over time?
Yeah, this is a great one. And it comes back to this VUS discussion, this variant of uncertain significance. I think it can be really reassuring to know that at least within Simons Searchlight and in general, the genetics community wants to give you the answer. So we are learning more every day as we're doing genetic testing globally, because there's a network internationally that we compile and database of what we know with genetic variants and medical information. We call it ClinVar. So this is how we collaborate with other clinicians and labs worldwide. And Simons Searchlight also collaborates with this community. But through more genetic testing, we are finding out whether a variant might be tied to a medical condition or not. And that's just one way of finding out and learning if a genetic variant is problematic or causing an issue or not. The additional wonderful thing is that science is always moving forward. So also what's happening in basic science labs is experiments and studying different genetic variants. And we have many communities within Simons Searchlight where this research is happening. And that can be applied, that can be used to help us understand if it could be causing a problem for human beings. And so it's really that science is working together and marching forward to find an answer, especially for the variants of uncertain significance that can really leave families in limbo as it is not a proper diagnosis.
Okay, moving on. This one we touched on just a little bit before, but Jamie, if you can answer, what causes genetic variants to happen? Did I do something?
Yeah, I'll just echo what we all have said a little bit earlier, but that currently, based on our scientific knowledge and research that has been done, there's nothing that we have found that causes genetic variants to happen. We haven't been able to link any medications, any exposures, any lack of taking, XYZ vitamin to some child being diagnosed with a genetic condition. They truly are just spontaneous, random biological errors that happen in our body. and that we all have them. We just don't know that we have them until we have genetic testing coordinated to identify them. But it is just something natural that happens randomly.
Thank you. Moving on, I think this is one of the most popular questions that we're ever going to get is what can we do or what can be done to fix genetic variants, Misia?
This is a loaded question.
Yes.
But as you said, it is the number one sort of question on the table, especially once families get a diagnosis. It's like the what now part of getting a diagnosis. And really research has been progressing on this rapidly in the last several years. So currently, there are a few different ways that that is being tested to correct genetic variations. One of them is gene therapy. So gene therapy would be that change where something a little I like to think of it as like a cellular machinery is put into the body. It's done through a virus usually. And what happens is within each cell that it goes to, there will be an insertion in the DNA or a change in the DNA to correct and modify this error. And that's just one way. That's this more permanent sort of genetic therapy. But under the full umbrella of genetic therapies, there are also small molecule treatments and ASOs, this allele-specific oligonucleotide, that helps modify genetic variations, the products of them. So you can either sort of change or work at the DNA level. You can do the ASO, which is at this RNA, this intermediate level. It's a non-permanent change. Usually for our conditions, it would be this little molecule that gets injected into the spine, and then the change happens in the brain or so, but it doesn't go in, it doesn't make a permanent change. So if there's any negative side effects, they would be stopping the treatment. Or there would be a small molecule, which is usually the protein level. So it's the DNA corrections, RNA corrections, and protein corrections. All of these are being tested in many of the conditions within Simons Searchlight. And so I don't know if there's anything else that Jamie or Elisheva to add that I might have missed to help answer this question.
Mm-hmm. I'll just add that there are also ways of trying to modify how genes are expressed. So really trying to target if we can decrease the way that a gene is expressed, or on the other hand, even increase the way that a gene is expressed. There are certainly other genetic conditions that we have seen great success with gene therapy. So we're always hopeful to be able to translate areas of success to some of the neurodevelopmental genetic conditions that we study in Simons Searchlight. But an area that comes to my mind is with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. There are quite a few different gene therapy options that are available. So it's something that we have seen rising within the past couple of years with the advance of, scientific communities and medicine and such, and something that makes us really excited for the future.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to add a part that maybe is a little bit of a more realistic take on this, but it's just that I think everybody has to keep in mind that although technology is advancing so fast, this is something that is super complicated. And likely the genetic condition that, you're thinking of or that someone in your family might be affected with doesn't have a gene therapy that is associated with it yet. So it's yes, technology is advancing, and there are so many ways where we do see that there is progress, but it's also important to keep in mind that it's, like once you get a diagnosis or something like that, that it is quite an outreach to get there. So
I will also add on that there are pluses and minuses to each approach. So although I think obviously I often speak with families who are very eager to get a therapy today, some of our communities where there are some of these therapies taking place, there still is hesitation because of potential side effects, because of off-target effects, for example. So that's true too. There is movement But the right choice for you or your family there, has to be made as well. Because we do have some ASOs happening for the SCN2A community and some small molecule therapies going for GRIN2B and an ASO, I believe, as well. So there definitely is movement, but not everyone always chooses to participate. And the negative side effects to also weigh out the risks as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Moving on, Jamie, is there something I should have done to get my daughter tested sooner when she was 16 by the time we got her diagnosed?
This is certainly something that a lot of families ask, and I think first acknowledging that genetic testing is very location specific accessible. And what I mean by that is some countries have more access to genetic testing than others. Even here in the United States, some states have better access, some hospitals have better access. So it's nobody's fault, and parents shouldn't take blame that they feel like they were behind the ball on getting their child a diagnosis, because just the way that our infrastructures are built, that's not always as accessible as it should be, unfortunately. But genetic testing is becoming a lot more accessible, so I would try to not beat yourself up too much, in trying to take on the blame that you feel like you were late to getting the diagnosis. I would rather just acknowledge that you are able to get them a diagnosis now, which I think is huge and hopefully very helpful in terms of getting answers for your family and opening up doors for more developmental therapies and learning supports and such.
And Jamie, I think I'll also add that genetic testing has come such a long way, and likely a couple of years back, this testing might have not been available for your 16-year-old daughter. So you're doing great. All right, moving on. Misia, how is Simons Searchlight involved in supporting doctors to support children with rare diagnoses?
Yeah, so Simons Searchlight, I'll start with there's a few different ways. So Simons Searchlight, firstly, for several communities have been able to create these quarterly reports, these registry snapshots. So a shout out to our communications team. This is done for groups that have 10 or more participants. So if you haven't been able to get one for your group yet, hopefully in the future, as more people register and share information, we're able to provide that. But this is one really important way that today I find it makes a difference, because what ends up happening for these groups where we can make these registry reports, so it's live sort of data that we've been finding within our research registry. It gives numbers, high-level numbers of how many people participating, what are the age ranges, what are the common conditions, and then every 3 months when we make these reports, it summarizes some feature of our medical battery, our survey list. And what people end up doing is they end up taking these reports to their doctors. And so we've had doctors email us to find out more information. We know that it's getting out there. These reports can also be shared with the person's teachers and help understand the condition as a whole. And with medical literature, it's really tricky to read through everything, but also every doctor to dig through and find all the information is not as plausible always. And what gets written up is not always everything. Whereas we have sort of this sample international where we can compile all the information together. So that would be one way that I think it's supporting the doctors, it's supporting them to learn about these conditions. The other ways that we do it is that all the data that's provided is shared for free to researchers, so doctors and other researchers around the world. We de-identify, we remove your address, your email, any of that is not provided with your medical information. So it doesn't say the country of origin, none of that. It just says the genetic variation and the medical information you provide. And so that helps researchers actually publish papers and learn more about the condition. So I would say that our role very much has been to try to support the rare community, both doctors and families on both sides.
I'll just
Me-
add to
Yep.
Misia, that for some of the genetic conditions that we study in Simons Searchlight, we have been able to use our data to help inform gene reviews, which are clinical management guidelines that doctors and other clinicians can use to be able to determine appropriate management and screening of different systems that a certain genetic condition might increase the risk of, heart issues or endocrine issues and such. So if a gene reviews is available for a genetic condition that we study, then that is linked within our website on the individual gene pages.
Jamie, can you take part in Simons Searchlight research if based in the UK?
You sure can. So our research registry and our program is entirely online. We are international, so there's not any need to be in a certain physical location to be able to participate with us, since everything can be completed online with registering, consenting, virtually uploading the genetic testing report, completing surveys online, doing phone calls or video calls if that's something of interest. Then you can be in any country, anywhere in the world.
Misia, what does autosomal dominant mean?
Yeah, I wish I had visual aids sometimes, but autosomal dominant. So your chromosomes, there are 46 of them. If anyone has heard of the company 23andMe, it's 23 from mom, 23 from dad. And so your chromosomes are divided between sex chromosome and non-sex chromosome. So sex chromosome are the X and Y. They determine if you are biologically male or female. And so all the other chromosomes are called autosomal chromosomes. And autosomal dominant means that it's on a chromosome, not a sex chromosome, and that one genetic change within that gene that's on that chromosome is dominant. It's a problem if there's one genetic variation. Other conditions that you may have heard of, like cystic fibrosis, it requires two genetic changes, on one from inherited or that happened to the one from dad and the one from mom. But this one on the autosome can happen on just one, and then it's a dominant sort of effect.
Yep.
I'll
Jamie.
just add.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. I
ahead.
will just add that for autosomal dominant conditions, typically a 50% recurrence risk is quoted, and that really comes from knowing that the two chromosomes, there's only one that has a change that is sufficient to cause symptoms of that genetic condition. So then for every time that a person with an autosomal dominant condition goes to have a child, they could either pass on the chromosome that does not have the change or the chromosome that does have the change. So lots of times you'll hear clinicians or researchers quote a 50% chance, and that does reset per pregnancy. So it's not like somebody that has 6 children that we would expect that 3 of them would inherit the genetic condition and that 3 of them would not. It's a 50% chance per pregnancy that person has.
Yeah. Jamie, how do doctors know what signs and symptoms are related to different gene conditions?
Yeah, so this question really, I think, touches upon the power of research and participating in research programs and patient registries like Simons Searchlight, because we're really trying to collect data to be able to recognize the signs and symptoms that are associated with any particular genetic condition. So we inform what symptoms are associated with the genetic condition based on what's been reported in other individuals. So I think, of course, registering to participate with us, giving your data and sharing your experience can hopefully pave the way for other families that are coming behind you to be able to better inform care for those in the future.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that. I always tell participants when I'm on the phone with them, when I'm speaking with families, that you guys are our database. So thank you for participating. And, if you do have questions that you feel like physicians can't answer because there is limited research, probably other people that are experiencing the same genetic condition as you are your best bet at this point, because it's all part of research. We don't know, or we only know as much as we have provided to us, and that is literally you guys. So thank you, everyone. You are
And
truly
actually,
helping a cause. Yeah.
no, sorry. Actually, to piggyback on this, we have a very real example within Simons Searchlight. There is a eye condition that's associated with CTNNB1, and this was not known for many years until families started to say, hey, I heard someone else has this exact same very rare eye condition diagnosis. And
Yep.
so it wasn't till more and more people started to share that this rare eye condition is actually associated with the genetic condition, that we started looking for it within Simons Searchlight, but other researchers as well. So just to say that it's very real. The data is living and moving in real time, and it really makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and to add even further, it's sometimes you feel like you're contributing to research where there's so much going on that maybe your research or whatever you're contributing won't make a difference. But here, since we're dealing with such rare conditions, like every piece of information that we get is more information, and it truly makes a difference. Okay. Okay, moving on. Misia, what are the differences between copy number variants and single nucleotide variants?
So in general, copy number variants refers to a larger or chunk of DNA that's either deleted or duplicated. So a deletion might be missing several genes. A duplication might have an extra copy of those genes. And a single nucleotide within their chromosomes, within their DNA. And a single nucleotide variation, or an SNV, is a change on the nuclear level. So there's one DNA change, the nucleotide change from a C to a T or something like that, that should have been a T, but it became a C, for example. And something as simple as that could be the result of a genetic condition when it happens within a certain place in a gene. So both of these are included within Simons Searchlight, and sometimes this, even a larger deletion, if it includes that gene, that affected gene, we have a group of people where some people have the single nucleotide variant, some people have the large deletion, and they have the same genetic condition, because the end result is what really matters for the cell, that it's affecting the function of this gene. But that's the general difference between the two.
Jamie, in an autosomal dominant condition, does the unaffected gene continue to function normally?
So that would be the expectation, that, well, perhaps I should back up a little bit. I'll say, I think jumping off of what Misia had talked about a little bit earlier when she was defining autosomal dominant genetic conditions versus recessive conditions, like cystic fibrosis was the example that she provided. Some genes, one copy of that gene being changed is enough to produce symptoms, because you have to have both of those copies of genes working correctly to be able to keep that person healthy. So just having like 50% gene product from the one copy only continuing to work isn't enough for that person. So that would be like a dominant condition, like most of ours are here.
Yep. Misia, very popular question. Can you tell me why two kids from different families have the same genetic condition but have so many different effects from it? For example, one child has severe epilepsy while the other has no epilepsy. And Misia, before you answer, I'll continue to say that we don't only see two kids from different families who have the same genetic condition. Sometimes we see two kids from the same families that have the same genetic conditions that display completely differently.
Yes, it is not uncommon for people who even have the same DNA change, the same genetic variant, to have very different symptoms person to person. And one of the reasons that this happens is because the genetic condition, the genetic variation that you might be registering within Simons Searchlight are strong factors for creating the brain development or function, but it's not the only one. So there are thousands and thousands of genes within a human being. And so these other genes do play a role, and variants within those genes could be what we call modifying, whether you get a medical condition or not. Modifying it for the better, protective, or modifying it that it's not helping solve or help delay the problem that this variant you have or that your child has is caused by. And so that's one of the reasons that, for example, someone may or may not have epilepsy or other medical features. And so researchers are really starting to look into understanding what these modifications or modifiers might mean or might be. And it probably is, for the most part, different really from human to human. So it wouldn't be that everyone without epilepsy has these same modifiers that are protecting. It's so interactive, it's so complex, so much more than we would have ever predicted when we first started thinking of genetic testing. And so it can be helpful to understand, what does the community look like for my community? How does this person with the exact same genetic variant, how have they developed or how are they developing? But it doesn't define what your child, you as a person, might end up being, because you still are very different. In addition to other things like potential therapies, potential supports that you have access to, those things also do make a difference. And so really treating the person as they are is still really important, not treating them based on their genetic variant.
Absolutely. Jamie, my daughter has less notable characteristics of OCNDS. I'm still trying to grasp how much she is affected. Any way to figure this out?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think that I will echo a lot that Misia just said in her response, in that we know that a genetic condition might set certain parameters or expectations as far as what systems to be on the lookout in terms of if that person is at risk for developmental differences or seizures. But any genetic condition still doesn't define a person. They still have a lot of other genetic material that's influencing their health and development and such. So for your question, I think trying to get all of her systems screened, if she's not overtly experiencing seizures, is there any way to try to complete an EEG to see if she is having more subtle brain abnormalities that just aren't so noticeable clinically, and just trying to check all the T's and dot all of the I's. So just trying to really get her all of the assessments and such to get a better grasp on where she's at.
Yep. Misia, looking at research of our specific rare disorder, the sample size is extremely small, sample size of 50. How significant are the clinical outcomes reported in these studies?
Yes. So for many of the conditions on our list, when we start looking into the medical literature, it's not uncommon for the sample size to be quite small. And so a lot can change when you add another 20 people to the medical literature, another 20 people to the understanding of a condition. So it is not uncommon. And researchers know that. So know that in general, we're going to learn more the more that we find out from families, the more that we find out from people within the community. In terms of the clinical the clinical outcomes, when I hear something like clinical outcomes, I'm thinking like clinical therapies. And so maybe you might be thinking of like how this might shape a clinical trial, for example. In the rare community in general, there is the possibility to have clinical trials and have a natural history sort of collection at the same time. So just because you have a small sample size in the medical literature, the medical understanding wouldn't stop you from having a clinical trial if it would be beneficial or potentially beneficial, with the side effects being minimal for the community. So that there are ways around this in terms of for clinical trials. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Jamie, we have a 4.5-year-old with a genetic condition, but our local healthcare lacks expertise in this disorder. Is it worth seeking specialized care at a nearby children's hospital center, despite the cost, to ensure a more comprehensive approach to our child's health?
I think if possible, trying to seek expertise from a larger academic medical center or a larger children's hospital, you know, you don't know what type of benefit that is going to bring until that's an opportunity that you pursue. So I think if there is any avenue to be able to raise money and maybe stay with a local friend, or even contacting that hospital system, because sometimes hospitals do have those types of support systems in place for families that are coming to get a consultation, to be able to really tap into expertise that you may just not have available locally. Also, a lot of hospital systems are now functioning in the world of telemedicine. So sometimes based on that hospital, maybe you can go and get a one-time in-person consultation to really meet with the team, have them meet with your child, get a grasp of their medical and developmental histories. And then maybe moving forward from that point on, you can consult them virtually via telemedicine. So really trying to capitalize on those opportunities to use technology to our advantage, to really try to tap into those local expertise networks as we can.
Yep. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Misia, in a situation where the UK or English genetic department refuses to acknowledge a diagnosis of a genetic syndrome, and the primary experts on the condition are in France, where else can individuals seek support or information when they're only aware of the research in that specific country?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is not an uncommon question from people, because often an expert for a rare genetic condition may or may not live even in the country, even within the US being such a large country, might not be in your local area. So a few things to try. The first thing would be, is there a patient community already established for your condition? So is there a patient advocacy group, or is there a group on Facebook or WhatsApp, whatever there might be, where you can find out who else these other members of the community have tried, because likely they've tried some people, and then this saves you some time of this process of elimination. Especially patient advocacy groups are working towards creating networks often, so they can guide you towards a clinician. The great thing about the medical community as a whole is finding a clinician that is willing to work with you and learn about the condition, because it's completely plausible for a medical clinician to seek advice from that expert, even though they're not in their local country. So if you have a clinician who's willing to work with that and ask for resources and learn, that makes all the difference in the world. Because not everyone can travel. It's likely very difficult. And then always you can try to reach out to us at our coordinator email. I know that I've personally looked into finding what clinicians might be able to work with you or advise on your medical care. And so if there isn't those other options, definitely reach out to us and we can see what we can do to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie, where can I find the best information about my genetic condition or my child's genetic condition?
I'll say that this can certainly be dependent on the genetic condition, because there are ones that we study in Simons Searchlight that there's more information available than other conditions that are just newer in how they've been described and such. We do our best to keep all of our pages for our various genetic conditions as up to date as we can. So if there's a gene reviews, I know that we touched on that a little bit earlier, trying to update that as they become available. As Misia talked about with the quarterly reports and updating those quarterly. So certainly staying on top of just checking our different pages for our different genetic conditions. We also help to monitor Facebook pages for all of our various genetic conditions. I'm not sure if we hit on that at all quite yet, but those are Facebook communities that allow family members to connect and talk with each other, offer each other support. Our staff is always kind of hanging out in the background in case there's any questions that people are bringing up that our team can help to bring our expertise to answer. So the Facebook pages are a nice way that if there's a new article that is published, if there's some new research opportunity, that you can really find out about those in real time.
Yep. Misia, we touched on this before just a little bit, but why is completing your medical history survey or interview so important for Simons Searchlight participants and researchers?
Yes, I think a take-home point that we've touched upon many times is that it is so important. And I know that filling out medical history can be really repetitive. You've given it to your genetics provider, you've given it to your pediatrician or your regular any other provider, your OT potentially. And so honestly, filling it out with a research project can be really, time limiting. You just don't see it as a high value or high priority. In addition to giving back this information to you, we only know as much as you share with us. And so not participating in research is absolutely, of course, an option, and everyone has their right to make the priorities, but we cannot learn unless you participate. So our medical history survey, now called the annual medical history survey, is the one that we look at as a very comprehensive review of different body systems. And we track this over time. And so it's really helpful for us to share with researchers and learn what might be the future for this condition in terms of what people have been trying, what medications have worked. And I know these questions are questions that families want, and we can only get those if we learn from you. So it is very important.
Yep. Okay. Jamie, can you remind me again how I can join Simons Searchlight, and is there a cost associated?
Yes, there is no cost associated with joining Simons Searchlight. How you can join us if that is of interest is you can go to our website. It is simonssearchlight.org. And at the top towards the right, there is a big blue button that says join us. That'll walk you through how to create an account. You'll provide your consent, do the registration process, upload a copy of your child's genetic testing report that our team will then review. And then once you're approved, there will be surveys assigned. There is the opportunity to give a blood sample. So come participate with us.
Yes. And I think this concludes our Q&A portion of the webinar. And we'd just like to give a huge thank you to Misia and Jamie for joining us today. And to, of course, all those who attended our Q&A and asked questions. Thank you for joining. And as we've been sharing, if you'd like to learn more about Simons Searchlight, our registry, how you can get involved, please visit our website at simonssearchlight.org. You can always email us at coordinator@simonssearchlight.org. Our genetic counselors, myself, Jamie, Misia, and whoever else on the team would be so happy to answer any of your questions and address them as best as we possibly can. Especially if you feel like one of your questions wasn't answered today, or you need a more specific answer. And of course, just again, the take home point is that we thank you and for all of the information that you submit to us, because your information truly matters. This is not in a 1 in 300,000 situation. This is like a 1 in 50, 1 in 200, 1 in 300. So everything that you submit is helpful. It really, really is. Even if you don't see the direct effect, it really is helpful. So thank you again. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email us at coordinator@simonssearchlight.org.